Hello everyone. Before we start, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment with where you from and what time it is. That way, YouTube will keep pulling you stories like this. Now, let the shadows take over. I was 17 when I had what I still call the worst night of my life. I've never told the full story out loud. Not to my parents, not to my friends, not even to a therapist. But it's been almost 8 years now, and I think it's time to finally say it, if only to get it out of my head. My name is Haley Matthews. I grew up in a quiet neighborhood in Mentor, Ohio. A place where everyone still waves at each other, and you can hear sprinklers hissing in the summer. The kind of place where nothing really happens until something does. That night, I was babysitting for a family on the next street over, the Parkers. I'd watched their 5-year-old daughter, Zoe, a handful of times before. Zoe was a sweet, shy kid who loved unicorns and peanut butter crackers and insisted on wearing mismatched socks. Her parents were nice, a little uptight, maybe, but they always paid me well and never came home too late. That night they were going to a charity dinner about 30 minutes away and said they'd be home around midnight. I said sure. Showed up at 6:30 and everything seemed normal. Emphasis on seemed. Mrs. Parker walked me through the usual. Dinner's on the counter. Zoe's allowed 1 hour of cartoons. Bedtime at 8:30. She said they'd leave their phones on in case of emergency, but didn't expect anything. She's an angel when she's not overtired, she added with a smile, and I waved goodbye as they headed out the door. At first, everything really was fine. Zoe ate her mac and cheese, spilled some juice on the carpet, giggled a lot, and then we watched an episode of Bluey together. Around 8:20, I helped her brush her teeth and tucked her into bed in her pink room with a unicorn lamp and glow-in-the-dark stars. She asked me to read Goodnight Moon, which I did for probably the 5th time that week. She fell asleep halfway through the second read, clutching her little stuffed giraffe. By 9:10 p.m., I was curled up on the Parker sectional with my hoodie on and my phone out, scrolling TikTok and texting my best friend Emma about some dumb drama at school. I remember even thinking how peaceful the house felt. Quiet, clean, safe. It's funny how you don't notice when things start feeling off. It always starts so small. At first, it was just a sound. I heard something from upstairs. A soft click, like a door shutting. I paused my video and listened. Nothing. Zoe had already been out cold for a solid 30 minutes by then, and she was a deep sleeper. I figured maybe the heating vent popped or something. You know how old houses are. So I brushed it off. But then, maybe 5 minutes later, I heard footsteps. Slow ones. Just a few. Directly above the living room where I was sitting. It made my stomach tighten a little. I muted my phone and sat up. The Parkers didn't have any pets, just Zoe. I waited, barely breathing, but the footsteps stopped. Silence again. Too much silence. I decided to check on Zoe just to be sure. I crept up the stairs, trying to keep my footsteps light. Zoe's bedroom was at the end of the hall, and as I reached for the doorknob, I noticed it was already open wider than I had left it. I was certain I had pulled it almost shut earlier, just cracked so I could hear her if she cried. Now it was halfway open. I slowly peeked in. Zoe was still there, sound asleep, curled under the covers with her giraffe. Nothing seemed out of place. Her nightlight glowed softly, and everything looked untouched. I felt like an idiot for being spooked. I closed the door to the exact crack I'd left it before and turned around to head back downstairs. That's when I noticed it. The attic string. The Parkers had one of those pull-down attic doors in the hallway ceiling, and the string was hanging lower than before. I hadn't even noticed it when I came up the stairs, but now it swayed just slightly, like it had been tugged. Just a little, just enough. My chest tightened. I stared at it for maybe 10 full seconds, waiting for it to stop moving. I told myself it must have been air pressure or something, some kind of draft, but I couldn't shake the image of those footsteps from earlier. I should have called the Parkers right then. I should have called my dad, but I didn't. I told myself it was nothing and went back downstairs. It was 9:43 when the baby monitor started crackling. It was sitting on the coffee table next to me, and out of nowhere, this static just hissed through it like someone was brushing their hand across the microphone. Then it stopped, dead silent. Then a whisper. Zoe. I swear to God, I almost threw the thing across the room. I sat frozen, staring at the monitor like it had just grown teeth. I waited, more static. Then it went quiet again. I jumped up, heart pounding, and grabbed the baby monitor. My fingers were trembling so badly, I almost dropped it. I bolted up the stairs again, this time full adrenaline. When I got to Zoe's room, I flung the door open. She was still asleep. Nothing had changed, but now the attic string was fully pulled down and the wooden panel was cracked open. I backed away from the hall, sealing like it was a wild animal. I didn't know what to do. I didn't have any weapon. I was 17, wearing fuzzy socks and an oversized hoodie. There could be someone in the attic, and I was completely alone with a 5-year-old. I ran into Zoe's room, locked the door, and grabbed my phone. I was shaking so bad I couldn't type my passcode right the first few tries. I texted Emma. "Someone's in the house, in the attic. Not a joke." She replied instantly. "Call 911. And that's when the footsteps came again. This time slower, from the hallway, right outside the room. I grabbed Zoe's desk chair and wedged it under the doorknob, whispering to her not to wake up. She stirred a little, but stayed asleep. I held the monitor in one hand and my phone in the other, trying to keep myself from crying too loudly. I dialed 911 and whispered into the phone what was happening. I gave the address. The dispatcher told me to stay on the line and not to leave the room. Help was on the way. Then the doorknob turned. I let out a noise I didn't even recognize. Like part scream, part breath. The chair held barely. The knob twisted again, more forcefully this time. Then a thud, like someone putting their full weight against the door. Zoe finally woke up and started crying. I whispered for her to be quiet, that everything was okay, even though it wasn't. The 911 operator kept asking me if the person was still there. I said yes. I was whispering so fast I barely made sense. Then silence again. No more doorknob turning, just quiet. I waited. Minutes passed. The dispatcher told me police were 2 blocks away. Then the footsteps retreated slowly back down the hall. Then a creaking sound from above. He went back into the attic. I didn't move. I just crouched by Zoe's bed, holding her hand while she cried. The front door slammed open less than a minute later. I heard yelling, "Police!" They called out. I shouted back, and they told me to unlock the door slowly and step out. By the time they got us outside, 5 officers were searching the house. Another stayed with me and Zoe. I couldn't stop shaking. I couldn't answer most of their questions. I just kept staring at the attic. Eventually, one of the officers came down with something in his hand. A phone. It wasn't the Parkers. It was old, like flip phone old. And the wallpaper was a picture of Zoe taken from outside a window. That's when I lost it. They never found him. He wasn't in the attic anymore. Somehow between the second I locked the door and the moment the police arrived, he vanished. There was no exit up there, just insulation and beams. But they said there was evidence someone had been living there. Food wrappers, water bottles, and worst of all, kids' clothes. Not just Zoe's size, several different sizes. The Parkers were horrified, obviously. They never knew anyone was up there. They moved out a month later. I never babysat again. I still have nightmares about the whisper through the baby monitor, about the doorknob turning, about how close I came to opening that attic. And the worst part, the police said the phone had several unsent texts saved as drafts. All of them said the same thing. She's almost ready. I used to believe some kids were just a little off, that their strange drawings or unsettling comments were just weird phases or a way to get attention. I don't believe that anymore. Not after what happened in Woodridge, Illinois. Not after the night I babysat Lily Caldwell. It started on a chilly Tuesday evening in late October. I was 21, a broke college junior, picking up babysitting gigs around the suburbs to pay rent. I'd worked with a lot of families in the area. So, when a couple called last minute asking if I was available that night, I didn't think twice. The dad, Evan Caldwell, said he got my number from the Lockwoods, a family I sat for pretty often, and mentioned that their usual sitter canceled unexpectedly. "We're not really comfortable leaving her with someone new," he said, sounding genuinely nervous. "But it's kind of an emergency. My sister just went into labor up in Rockford, and we need to be there soon." I told him it was no problem. He gave me the address and said his daughter was quiet and easy to care for, nothing to worry about. When I pulled into their neighborhood, something about the street struck me as oddly quiet. Woodridge is a peaceful suburb, but this street felt hollow, like the air itself had thinned out. The house was on a cul-de-sac at the very end. A pale yellow two-story with a creaky storm door and piles of dead leaves blown into every corner of the front steps. The place looked clean, but weirdly empty, like a staged home for sale that no one actually lived in. No Halloween decorations, no pumpkins, no signs of life. Evan answered the door. He was in his mid-30s, polite but twitchy, with dark circles under his eyes and a voice that moved too fast. "Thanks for coming," he said. "Renee's upstairs getting Lily ready." He stepped aside to let me in. The living room was barely furnished, just a couch, a lamp, a coffee table, and bare walls. No family photos, no toys, no clutter. It felt like a model home, waiting for real people to show up. "She's shy," Evan said, rubbing his hands together. "She's 7, doesn't talk a lot, likes to draw." He kept glancing toward the staircase, like he was hoping Renee would hurry up. After a moment, she came down, holding Lily's hand. Lily was pale, not sickly, just colorless. Her blonde hair looked thin and tangled, and her eyes were huge and dark, framed by shadows that didn't belong on a child. She didn't say a word, just walked up to me and handed me a piece of folded paper. It was a drawing of a house. This house, with a black stick figure standing in the window. No face, just a stretched white smile and 2 empty circles for eyes. I tried to hand it back to her, but Renee quickly snatched it and stuffed it into her purse. "She draws a lot of weird things," she said with a forced smile. "Just ignore them." They gave me the rundown. Snacks were in the fridge. Bedtime was at 9:30, and Lily didn't have any allergies. Then they left. No hugs or kisses goodbye. No last-minute reminders. Just a quick, anxious wave, and the sound of their car pulling out of the driveway. Lily stood in the middle of the living room watching the door. I asked if she wanted to watch a movie. No response. I asked if she was hungry. She shook her head. Then she sat cross-legged on the carpet and pulled a box of crayons and paper from under the coffee table. Without a word, she started drawing again, her red crayon moving fast across the page. I sat on the couch behind her, texting my roommate, and trying to shake off the weird feeling that had settled in my chest the second I stepped into that house. After about 10 minutes, I leaned forward and asked what she was drawing. Without looking up, she said, "Her face." I paused. "Whose face?" She didn't answer. By 8 p.m., I was already counting down the minutes. Nothing had happened, but the house felt off. Lily barely moved or spoke, just kept drawing page after page and glancing occasionally toward the kitchen window or the hallway behind the stairs. At one point, I thought I heard a soft knock from upstairs, but when I looked up, Lily was still sitting there, calm as ever. Eventually, she stood and wandered into the hallway without saying a word. I heard her footsteps on the stairs. I waited a few minutes, figuring she needed the bathroom, but when she didn't come back, I got up and followed. I found her sitting at the end of the upstairs hallway in front of a small square door near the floor. One of those weird little crawl space doors you see in older houses. It was only about 3 foot tall with a round metal knob, and it looked like it hadn't been opened in years. Lily was staring at it, holding her newest drawing in her lap. "Lily," I said, walking toward her. "What are you doing?" "She's knocking," she whispered without turning her head. I stopped cold. "Who is?" She raised her hand and pointed to the crawl space door. "You have to say no," she said. "You can't say yes." I didn't move. The door didn't move either. There was no sound, no wind, nothing. But the hallway felt colder than it had a minute ago. Lily stood up slowly and walked past me back toward her room. I stayed there for a full 30 seconds, staring at the little door, half expecting it to open by itself. Back downstairs, Lily sat quietly and drew some more. I tried not to look at what she was making, but I couldn't help glancing. She was drawing the crawl space door and the same stick figure woman with no face. But this time, the door was open. At 9:30, I told her it was bedtime. She didn't argue, just walked up the stairs, climbed into bed, and pulled the covers up. I sat beside her and tried to lighten the mood. "Do you want me to read something to you?" She shook her head. Then she whispered, "She watches me sleep. Don't let her in." I didn't say anything. I turned on her night light, whispered good night, and left the room. Downstairs, I sat on the couch with my phone in my lap, staring at the front door. I checked the time every 2 minutes. 9:41, 9:43, 9:47. At 9:52, I heard 3 slow, deliberate knocks from upstairs. I froze. My body tensed in a way I've never felt before. My brain tried to reason. Maybe Lily got out of bed. Maybe she was playing a prank. But those knocks didn't come from her door. They came from the hallway. I stood and took a few steps toward the stairs. Everything in me said to call the parents, call the police, call someone. But instead, I grabbed my phone and slowly crept up the stairs. The hallway was empty. Lily's bedroom door was cracked open, and the nightlight glowed faintly from inside. She was in bed, asleep, but the crawl space door was open. Just a few inches, but open. On the white wood, 3 fresh red smudges ran down the center like fingers had dragged across it. I backed away. My breath caught in my throat. I turned and hurried back down the stairs, grabbed my bag, and reached for my phone. I texted Renee, "Hey, is there anyone else who has access to the house? Anyone else who could be here right now?" No response. I turned toward the stairs again. That's when I saw Lily. She was standing halfway down, barefoot, eyes still half closed. She looked blank, empty, like she wasn't really awake. I started to walk toward her when she mumbled, "Yes, yes, yes, yes." I stopped cold. "Lily," I asked, "what are you saying?" Her eyes slowly blinked open. She looked confused, like she didn't know how she got there. "She's here," she whispered. That was it. I grabbed her by the hand, wrapped her in the throw blanket from the couch, and called 911. I didn't even explain. I just told the dispatcher the address, said someone might be in the house, and that I was taking the child outside. As I reached the front door, I heard a creaking sound behind me. I turned. The crawl space door was swinging open wider. Just before it stopped, I saw something inside. A face, pale, grinning, too wide, staring directly at me. Then it vanished. I ran. The police showed up 6 minutes later. They searched the house top to bottom, crawl space included. Nothing. No sign of forced entry, no footprints, no one hiding in the walls. But inside the crawl space, they found a pile of Lily's drawings. Dozens of them, all of the same woman. Stick figure, black body, no eyes, bleeding mouth, arms too long. In every picture, the house was burning. Evan and Renee never returned. Their phones were disconnected. No records of them ever living at that address. No enrollment under Lily's name in the school district. The house was listed as abandoned and condemned. 3 days later, I drove by. A week after, the windows were boarded up. A sign on the front door read, "Do not enter, unsafe structure." In my coat pocket, I found one last drawing. A picture of me standing in the hallway holding Lily, and behind me, her in the exact same pose, that I almost didn't take the job. The ad was vague, handwritten, tacked to the bulletin board outside a small-town grocery store, just off Route 27. It read, "Childcare needed, nights only. No experience necessary. Cash paid nightly. Discretion required." I was broke. 19 running. I didn't ask questions. When I called the number, a man with a tired voice gave me an address and told me to be there by 6 p.m. sharp. "Don't let him answer the door," he warned. He's still adjusting. The house was modest, nestled at the edge of a forest, far enough from town that the street lights faded, and the only sound was wind rustling through trees. A mailbox leaned sideways at the end of the drive, the name Holbrook barely legible on the side. I remember thinking how normal it all looked, like a place where someone once baked cookies and mowed the lawn every Sunday. But grief leaves fingerprints, and this place had them smeared across every surface. The man who greeted me looked more like a ghost than a father. Gaunt, wrinkled clothes, hair thinning and wild. "He's 8, he mumbled, barely making eye contact. "Name's Micah. I'll be back around 2. You won't need to do much. Just keep him company. Don't let him stay up too late. And whatever you do, don't bring up her. I nodded. He handed me an envelope, cash, and small bills, and disappeared down the gravel road. Micah was quiet. He didn't say much during dinner, just stared at his plate, and occasionally peeked up at me with big hollow eyes. After I cleaned up, we sat in the living room. I let him pick a movie, but he kept glancing at the hallway like he expected someone to walk out. I told him he didn't have to talk if he didn't want to. He finally whispered, "She used to sing to me at night. I can't sleep without it now." I smiled gently, but inside something prickled. Not discomfort, recognition. When it was time for bed, he asked if I'd stay until he fell asleep. I nodded and sat beside him on the edge of the bed. The room smelled like lavender and dust. A teddy bear with one missing eye sat tucked under his arm. "Can you sing?" he asked softly. I froze just for a second. Then I nodded again. My voice was low, slow, almost mechanical. I sang something I hadn't heard since I was very small. The melody surprised me, as if it had been sleeping in me all this time. Micah's eyes closed, his breathing slowed. I watched him sleep for a while, longer than I needed to. His face looked peaceful. He looked like someone I used to know. At 2:07 a.m., the father returned. He barely said a word as I handed back the spare key. He slept okay, I told him. He nodded once and shut the door. I walked back down the gravel road, cash folded into my jacket pocket, shoes crunching beneath me. The stars were sharp that night, the wind cold, and I couldn't stop humming that lullaby. I went back the next night, and the one after that. Each time Micah said less, but he watched me more, studied me like something about me didn't sit right. One night he said, "Your eyes are different." I tilted my head. "How so?" He didn't answer. He just pulled the blanket up to his chin and turned toward the wall. On the 7th night, something changed. He didn't come to the door. The father did, but he looked frantic, sweaty, pale. "He won't leave his room," he muttered. "He says he saw you outside his window last night." I blinked. "I wasn't here." "I know," the man whispered. Then he looked me straight in the face, as if trying to figure something out. "You look like her," he said. "Exactly like her. But that's not possible. You're too young." I forced a nervous laugh. Must just be a coincidence. But in my chest, something turned over. Something ancient. That night, Micah wouldn't speak to me. He sat curled in the corner of the room, not on the bed. His eyes never blinked. His lips moved silently, like he was repeating a prayer. I sat with him in silence, just watching, waiting. By morning, he'd fallen asleep on the floor. I carried him to bed. It wasn't until the 10th night that everything came undone. The father was gone longer than usual. A storm rolled in, wind howling, lights flickering. Micah stayed close to me, his hand gripping mine like a lifeline. "He says you're not real," he whispered. "Who?" I asked. "The man in the walls." My skin prickled. "He says you're like the girl who came before." I didn't reply. I didn't need to because I remembered her now. I remembered the singing, the blood, the way the mother had screamed when I came back that final night. Not out of fear, but recognition. She'd known me, known what I was, what I brought, and she tried to stop me. I remembered the fire, the smell of burnt wood and scorched flesh, and the silence that followed. I'd wandered for years after that. No name, no age, just a feeling, a hunger, a whisper in the back of my skull that led me to places like this. Children like Micah. The door creaked behind me. Micah turned. "Your eyes are black now," he said softly. "They weren't like that before." I smiled. Not out of malice. Not even joy. Just instinct. I reached for him slowly, the way you might reach for a candle in the dark. "You don't have to be afraid," I whispered. "I'm here now. I've always been here." The lights flickered again, and then there was only the sound of the storm. When the father returned, the house was silent, too silent. He found Micah's room empty, the sheets cold, a lullaby playing on loop from an old music box on the dresser, and on the wall, written in a child's shaky handwriting, were 6 words. She was the girl who came before. The only reason I took that babysitting job was because I felt sorry for the old woman. Mrs. Evelyn Morris lived 2 miles past town limits in a crooked house that sagged to one side, like it was trying to collapse in on itself. She called me one Thursday morning, said she got my number from the community board at the church, and asked if I could watch her granddaughter for one night. Said it was an emergency trip to the city, and she'd pay me $100 cash if I could stay until midnight. I was 16 and broke, so I said yes without thinking. Her voice over the phone had this old crackling tone, like someone whose vocal cords had been dragged across gravel. She mentioned her granddaughter was quiet and well-behaved, but a little different. And that was it. No further explanation. When I pulled up to the house that evening, it was already getting dark. The place looked like something straight out of a horror movie. 2 stories, faded green paint, windows too high off the ground, and weeds growing up through the porch steps. It sat at the edge of a stretch of woods that seemed to grow thicker the further you looked, like the trees were trying to inch toward the house. Mrs. Morris met me at the door. She was thin, brittle look, with skin like yellow parchment and eyes that never blinked long enough to feel natural. Her breath smelled like old tea and menthols. She barely greeted me before she launched into instructions. No sweets after 7. She doesn't like loud noises. Don't let her near the hall mirror upstairs. If she says something strange, just ignore it. I asked what she meant by strange, and Mrs. Morris just said, "You'll see." Then called out behind her, "B, come say hello." A small girl peeked out from behind the stairwell. She looked no older than 6 or 7, barefoot with thick black hair and skin pale enough to make her eyes look almost too big. She didn't wave or smile, just stared at me like she was trying to decide if I was real. "This is Beatrice," Mrs. Morris said. "She prefers B. Be good for her tonight, okay?" B didn't respond. Then Mrs. Morris grabbed her coat, handed me 2 20s and 2 10s with a shaky hand, and muttered, "I'll be back around midnight. Don't go upstairs if you don't need to." And then she was gone. B didn't move from the stairwell for at least another minute. I asked if she wanted to watch a movie or have dinner, and she shook her head. "I already ate," she whispered. Her voice was soft but scratchy, like someone who hadn't used it much lately. We sat in the living room. I scrolled on my phone while she sat in the armchair with her knees pulled up to her chest. The whole house creaked around us. Every gust of wind outside made the walls moan. I figured she was just a weird kid from a rough situation, and I wasn't about to make things worse by pressing her to talk. But after about 20 minutes of silence, B spoke. "She doesn't like you." I looked up from my phone. "Who doesn't?" She turned her head slowly, eyes flicking toward the ceiling. "The mother in the mirror." I laughed a little before I could stop myself. "You mean your grandma?" B shook her head. "No, the other one. The one upstairs." My stomach tightened a bit. I glanced toward the stairs and then back at her. "You mean your reflection?" "She's not my reflection," B said. "She lives in the hall. She waits." I forced a smile and said something like, "Okay, well, we're staying down here, so no worries." But the truth was that house suddenly felt colder. Around 8 o'clock, I offered to put on a movie. We picked something old and boring. I don't even remember the name. I sat on the couch pretending to watch it, but really I was paying attention to her. She hadn't blinked in a long time, and every now and then, her head would tilt like she was listening for something no one else could hear. At 8:47, the power went out. Just like that, total darkness. The house groaned, and I heard something shift upstairs. A long scraping sound like furniture being dragged across the floor. "Crap," I muttered, standing up. "You got a flashlight?" B didn't answer. She was still in the chair, hands folded in her lap, like she hadn't noticed. "B, she's awake," she whispered. "She comes when the lights go out." I checked my phone. No signal, no bars, just a black screen and 8:49 glowing in the corner. I turned on the flashlight and started toward the kitchen, thinking maybe there were candles or a breaker box back there. B didn't follow. She just sat there staring at the blank television screen like it was still on. The kitchen was even colder than the living room. I searched the drawers, found some matches, a lighter, a half-used candle, and an old rotary flashlight that barely worked. I lit the candle and started to head back when I heard something from upstairs. Not a scrape this time. A voice, soft, raspy, muttering something I couldn't understand. I froze, then Bea screamed. It wasn't a loud scream. It wasn't even a scream of fear. It was shrill and strange, like a bat screeching underwater. When I ran back into the living room, she was standing now, her eyes wide, staring at the stairwell. "She's coming," Bea said. "She's mad at you." "Who? Your grandmother?" Bea shook her head, so hard her hair whipped across her face. "Know her. You looked at her too long." I didn't know what the hell she meant, but I grabbed her hand and said, "Let's go outside. Let's just wait for your grandma out front." Bea pulled back. "No, she's in the mirrors out there too. Bea, you can't run. You have to close your eyes when she passes." I didn't have time to argue. Something moved on the stairs. Not the sound of a footstep, but something scraping along the wood, like nails. I turned my flashlight toward it and saw nothing. And then I did. A reflection from the hallway mirror upstairs. The one Mrs. Morris told me to avoid. A woman standing sideways. Her body bent backward at the waist like her spine had cracked in half. Long black hair that moved like it was underwater, and a face that was wrong, pale. Mouth too wide, no eyes. Just smooth skin stretched across where they should have been. I turned off the flashlight, blew out the candle. Bea gripped my arm and whispered, "Don't move." The floor above us creaked, and then came the sound of breathing. Not ours. Wet, rattling breathing. Closer, closer, then right above us. I closed my eyes. I don't know why. I just did. Something passed by the stairwell. I felt air shift across my face like something huge had walked through the room. Bea didn't move, didn't speak. She just squeezed my arm tighter. Then silence. Then a knock on the front door. 3 times. Knock, knock, knock. I opened my eyes. Everything was quiet again. The lights flickered back on a second later, like nothing had happened. The living room looked the same. Bea was staring at the door. I walked over, peeked out through the curtains. No one was there, but something had been carved into the wood of the porch railing. "She's mine now." I turned to Bea. "Did you do that?" She didn't answer, just stared at the TV again, which was still off. At midnight, Mrs. Morris came back. I told her what happened. The power outage, the voice upstairs, the thing in the mirror. She didn't flinch. She just said, "Did you open the front door?" I shook my head. "Good," she said. Then she didn't get in. Not all the way. I never went back. A week later, I drove past the house on my way to pick up my sister. The windows were boarded up. Yellow tape around the porch. I stopped at a gas station nearby and asked the clerk if he knew what happened. He said the house had been condemned. The old woman inside was found dead. Heart attack or something. No signs of trauma, but no child was found. No Beatrice. Just dozens of drawings covering the upstairs hallway walls. All of the same woman standing in the mirror that I never wanted to babysit again after that night. I didn't even tell anyone what really happened. Not my parents, not my friends, not even the counselor my mom forced me to talk to when I started flinching every time someone knocked on a door. They thought it was just teenage burnout. But the truth is, I still hear him whispering sometimes, just faintly, like he's still there, standing in that hallway, his hand on the wood, asking if I can hear her too. His name was Owen. He was 6 years old, and by the time I left that house, I didn't know if he'd ever come back. It was supposed to be an easy job. One night, I was 17, broke, and trying to save up for a used car. Mrs. Carver called me on a Thursday afternoon after seeing my babysitting flyer on the board at the gas station. She sounded tired. Not just physically tired, like the kind of tired that soaks into your bones and never really leaves. She said she had to drive out to Des Moines to visit her mother in the hospital and didn't want to bring her grandson. "Owen's a quiet boy," she said. "He's been through some things. He doesn't speak much anymore, but he won't give you any trouble. I'll be back around midnight. I just need someone here with him." I arrived at the house around 5 o'clock. It was a small white farmhouse, surrounded by frozen fields and bare trees that looked like black veins stretching across the gray sky. The place didn't look run down exactly, but there was a hollowness to it, like it had seen too much sadness to keep pretending. Wind chimes clinked softly on the porch, even though I couldn't feel any wind. Mrs. Carver opened the door before I knocked. She was in her late 50s, wearing an old cable-knit sweater and jeans that hung too loose on her frame. Her face was pale, and her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. She didn't invite me in right away, just stood there for a second, looking over her shoulder before turning back to me. "Don't let him near the cellar door," she said. "If he asks, just tell him it's locked. Don't open it. Don't talk about what's behind it, please." Then she stepped aside and let me in, grabbing her purse from a chair and handing me a short list of emergency numbers. "He's in the living room. He's had dinner already. He might not say much, but he'll listen. Thank you again for coming." She didn't wait for a reply, just gave me one last tired glance and walked out, her boots crunching softly against the snow-dusted steps. Owen was sitting on the carpet in front of the TV when I found him, small, pale, with blonde hair that looked like it hadn't been brushed all week. He wasn't watching anything. The TV was off. He was holding a small wooden airplane in his lap, running his finger over the wings in slow, absent circles. I crouched beside him and smiled. "Hey, I'm Tessa. I'm going to hang out with you tonight, okay?" He didn't respond, just blinked once, then looked back down at the plane. For the next hour, we didn't speak. I sat on the couch, scrolling through my phone while Owen stayed on the floor, still spinning that propeller. It was the quietest babysitting job I'd ever had. And yet, something about it felt heavier than any screaming toddler or chaotic family I'd dealt with before. It was in the air. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was the kind that presses against your ribs like something's waiting underneath it. I tried not to stare, but every now and then I'd catch Owen glancing down the hallway toward the back of the house. At first, I didn't think much of it. Old houses creak. Kids get spooked. But the fifth time he looked, I followed his gaze. There was a door at the end of the hallway. Tall, warped wood with a thick iron latch and a rusted padlock dangling beneath it. The cellar. Something about it made the hair on my neck stand up. It didn't look like part of the house. It looked like it had been there long before the rest of it had been built. I tried to ignore it. Around 7:30, Owen finally spoke. Just one word. "She's listening." I looked up from my phone. "What was that?" He pointed toward the hallway. "She listens through the floor. My mom. She's still down there." My chest tightened. I remembered what Mrs. Carver had said on the phone. He'd been through something. I hadn't asked for details, but now I didn't need to. I knelt beside him again and tried to keep my voice light. "Your grandma said she went away, remember?" "She didn't want to leave," he whispered. "She said the baby was cold and she had to keep him warm, so she stayed. She says it's warmer down there." I couldn't respond. I just sat there frozen, feeling like I was hearing something I wasn't supposed to. A kid's imagination, maybe, but it didn't feel like make-believe. It felt like memory. After an awkward attempt at distracting him with a board game, I eventually got Owen upstairs and into bed around 8:30. He didn't argue, didn't speak again, just curled into the blankets with that same wooden airplane clutched to his chest. I tucked him in, left the hall light on, and closed the door softly behind me. As I stepped away, I heard him whisper one last thing. "She knocks louder when you're alone." Back downstairs, the house felt different. Emptier somehow, like it knew the kid was asleep, and now it could breathe again. I sat on the couch, phone in my lap, trying to shake the tension crawling up my spine. I texted my friend that the house was giving me the creeps. She sent back a ghost emoji and said, "Don't fall in the cellar." LOL. I didn't laugh. At 9:42, I heard it. Knock, knock, knock. Not from the front door. From the cellar. I didn't move at first, just sat there staring at the hallway. It came again. 3 slow, deliberate knocks, then silence. I grabbed the house phone and checked the list of numbers. My fingers hovered over Mrs. Carver's, but I didn't press it. I was afraid she'd tell me the truth, afraid she'd already know. The knocks didn't come again, but I couldn't sit still. I walked to the hallway, heart pounding, flashlight app glowing in my shaking hand. The cellar door stood there unchanged, still chained, still locked. But something was beneath it, a folded piece of paper shoved out from the crack. I picked it up and slowly opened it. Crayon. A stick figure of a woman with long black hair and hollow eyes, standing beside two smaller shapes. One child in her arms, another holding her hand. Written across the top, in shaky letters, "We're still a family." My stomach flipped. I backed away. Behind me, I heard soft footsteps on the stairs. It was Owen. He wasn't supposed to be up. He looked at me like he already knew what I'd seen. "She doesn't want to be alone anymore," he said. "She said she forgives you." My voice cracked. "Owen, you don't have to listen to her. She says you remind her of her sister," he said. "She says she misses you too." That broke me. I grabbed his hand and led him back upstairs. He didn't resist. I tucked him in, pulled the blanket tight around his shoulders, and sat beside him for a long time without saying anything. He didn't ask for a story. He just stared at the ceiling, eyes wide, like he was waiting for something to speak through it. At midnight, Mrs. Carver came home. I met her at the door and told her everything about the knocking, the drawing, what Owen said. She didn't cry. She didn't look surprised. She just whispered, "I should have moved after the funeral. I should have taken him away from this place." I wanted to ask if the story was true, if Owen's mom really died down there, but the answer was already on her face, and I wasn't ready to hear it. As I left the house, the wind chimes on the porch were still. No breeze, just the weight of everything behind that door pressing against my chest. 2 days later, I drove past the house again. The windows were boarded up. A red sign taped across the porch said, "Condemned, no entry." I never babysat again. I kept the drawing. I don't know why. Maybe to remind myself it was real. Sometimes I look at it and wonder if Owen ever really had a chance to move on, or if part of him stayed there, frozen in time, waiting for a mother who never left. She said she forgave me, but I don't think I'll ever forgive myself that I don't speak about what happened that night anymore. Not because I've convinced myself it wasn't real, but because I'm afraid that if I say it wrong, if I accidentally echo his name or describe the sound he makes too clearly, he might hear me. I might draw him back, and I don't think I'd survive a second encounter. I've babysat for over 20 families since I was 15. Kids with behavioral issues, rich parents who thought their kid's iPad was a personality, even a pair of twins who locked me in a pantry for 3 hours. But none of that prepared me for what I experienced in the Taylor house. That job came through a referral I wasn't expecting. A distant cousin of a friend texted me saying she knew a family that needed someone reliable last minute and for big money. I was 18 and working weekends wherever I could to save up for my first car. So I didn't even hesitate when she said it paid $300 for one night. The only condition, I had to stay the entire night. No early exits, no backing out. The house was outside Eugene, Oregon, tucked into a wooded slope that overlooked nothing but dense, dark forest. It looked like something from a modern architecture magazine. Flat roof, tall glass walls, the kind of place with too many clean lines and not enough warmth. As I drove up, my GPS died just before I reached the driveway, and there were no streetlights for miles. When I parked and walked up the curved concrete steps, I noticed the windows didn't reflect anything, not even me. Dr. Taylor answered the door. He was sharp, gray hair, glasses, face like he hadn't smiled in years. He wore a dark turtleneck and had a Bluetooth earpiece blinking red in his ear. His wife stood behind him, quiet and ghostly, her face gaunt and eyes unfocused like she wasn't entirely present. They told me their son Milo was already fed, and his bedtime was 9 p.m. sharp. They handed me a clipboard with instructions, thanked me in voices that felt rehearsed, and turned to leave. But just before walking out, Dr. Taylor paused and looked at me. "Keep sound on," he said. "Music, TV, anything. Do not let the house go completely silent. If Milo mentions the man in the silence, ignore it and do not repeat that name out loud." That was all he said. I stood there for a moment after they left, clutching the clipboard, half thinking it was some weird joke. Then I saw Milo. He was standing at the end of the hallway, small, maybe 7 years old, in flannel pajamas, holding a stuffed gray rabbit. His hair was curly, his skin pale, and his eyes too still for a kid his age. He didn't greet me, just stared like he already knew something I didn't. I tried to lighten the mood, walked over and asked if he wanted to watch a movie. He nodded once. I put on some animated film and sat beside him on the couch. Even with the sound playing, the house felt too quiet. No creaks, no heater hum, no fridge noise. Like the house itself had been vacuum sealed. Milo barely reacted to the film. Every 10 minutes or so, he glanced toward the hallway that led to the bedrooms, and then back to the TV, as if checking to see if the quiet was getting closer. At 8:15, he finally spoke. "You hear him yet?" I looked at him confused. "Who?" I asked. "The one who lives between sounds," he said. "He gets closer when it's quiet. He doesn't walk. He slides like a whisper made of skin." I laughed awkwardly, trying to shake off the goosebumps rising on my arms. "Sounds like something out of a creepy movie," I said. But Milo didn't smile. "He talks without words. He watches through the corners," he whispered, then turned back to the movie like he hadn't just said the most terrifying sentence I'd ever heard. I didn't say anything after that. At 9 o'clock, I brought him to bed. He didn't fight it, didn't ask for a story. He just crawled under the covers and stared at the ceiling. When I turned to leave, he said, "Keep the door cracked, but don't stand in the hall too long. He likes when you linger." I left the door barely open and practically speed walked back to the living room. I turned the volume up on the TV, put on a reality show with lots of talking, and tried to distract myself on my phone. But at 9:41, everything stopped. Not just the show. The sound died across the board. My phone stopped buzzing. The heater shut off. Even the static that comes with silence was gone. This wasn't normal quiet. This was a suffocating, unnatural absence of sound. Like the world itself had been muted. My body locked up. I stood slowly, every instinct screaming that something was wrong. The light from the television stayed on, but no audio came through. I turned in place, feeling the air thicken. Something was moving. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it pushing against the edges of the room, curling around the furniture, slithering against the walls. Then I heard it, not a voice, but breath, deep and wet, like someone exhaling through soaked fabric. It came from behind me. I turned fast. Nothing, but it was there. I could feel it coiling through the air like a fog that wasn't visible. My eardrums pulsed like they were vibrating with pressure. I stumbled backward and ran up the stairs. Milo's door was wide open. He was sitting upright, eyes wide, whispering backwards numbers to himself. 30, 29, 28. I told him to come with me, but he didn't move. "He's under the floor now," he said. "He's listening through our breath. Don't breathe too loud. He'll find the shape of your lungs." I grabbed Milo by the arm, scooped him up, and rushed into the guest bathroom, locking the door behind us. My phone screen flickered. Still no sound. I turned the flashlight on and whispered a lullaby, not for Milo, but for me, to break the silence, to stay alive. The walls started to bend. I'm not saying metaphorically. They bent. The corners twisted like someone was pushing them inward. The air was syrup. Milo was whispering something else now, something that didn't sound like words. I covered his ears and tried not to scream. Then I saw it in the mirror above the sink. A tall, skinless figure, distorted and warped, gliding across the hallway behind us. It had no face, just folds. Its body shimmered like water under static. It wasn't walking. It wasn't even moving in a way I understood. It flickered, shifted, breathed silence into the room. And then, just as fast as it started, it ended. Sound came rushing back like a gasp. The TV downstairs blared. My phone buzzed so hard it fell off the sink. Milo blinked twice and looked at me like he didn't know how we got there. At 7:02 a.m., the front door opened. Dr. and Mrs. Taylor walked in like nothing had happened. I tried to speak, but the words came out thin. I told them I wanted to leave. Dr. Taylor didn't ask questions, just handed me the envelope with the money and said, "Thank you for keeping the noise going." As I turned to leave, Milo walked up to me and handed me a drawing. It was of me standing in the hallway. Behind me, in the corner of the paper, was a tall black figure with no face. Underneath, written in small, scratchy handwriting, were the words, "He remembers your silence." I never babysat again.